So I'm Madhumita Mantri. I'm a product lead at StarTree. It's an early stage startup in Bay Area focused on real-time analytics. So that's about me. I have worked with Ed long time back at LinkedIn. He was my mentor who helped me to grow at LinkedIn and have been huge supporter and sponsor. And I'm really thankful for him to join the session today and also was patient with my previous glitch on the LinkedIn Live. So, welcome, Ed, to this session, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you. So, with that, I'll open up the floor to you. And my first question to you, if you can give a quick intro about your career journey and something not in your LinkedIn profile.
Absolutely. So thanks, Madhu, for having me, and thanks to everyone who's able to join or listen to the audio recording later. So as Madhu mentioned, we met at LinkedIn, but I've been doing technical program management most of my life. I got started when I was a teenager, doing it for video game companies, went to school, got into the industry, and worked for a couple of companies. But most notably, I was at LinkedIn for about 8 years. So on the comical side, I did start thinking about those issues we were having with live video, how to debug them, which on-call list to engage with. So there will be some follow-ups to make sure that doesn't affect others. But after LinkedIn, last June, I actually transitioned into the self-driving car industry. The company I joined was called Argo AI, and they were funded by vehicle manufacturers, just Ford and Volkswagen, with investment interest from companies like Lyft, Walmart, and Amazon. When you talk about those companies, all of them were affected by market changes, and they all started making cuts on their side. So the self-driving car company I was working for was actually shut down about 5 months into my journey there, and I ended up being unemployed in November. Some of the engineers did transition to working on other technology for Ford or Volkswagen, but I was naive and thought that I could get a job in Silicon Valley pretty quickly. But for about 4 months, I faced a lot of rejection, both for economic reasons and my own growth opportunities. I finally began to get a lot of offers in February, and I did recently join FAIR as their first data TPM. Something that's interesting that's not on my profile but kind of relevant here is I've always had a strong interest in social sciences, things like history, philosophy, psychology. And I actually had to lean on those things pretty heavily during the layoff to help me manage and process some of the economic challenges and rejections. So I leaned on a lot of philosophies like Nietzsche talks about growing up as a camel and bearing others' burdens and carrying a lot of burdens, but going through a metamorphosis to be a child where you're more interested in learning and growth. Albert Camus talks about how like good things happen to bad people, bad things happen to good people. I read some of the Stoics, like Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and some modern biology books, such as Good Reasons for Bad Feelings, which basically takes a lot of the stresses and anxieties that we feel today and it puts it into an evolutionary context. So, for example, when Madhu and I are feeling nervous about the technical issues earlier, a lot of the anxieties and stress that we're feeling were actually evolved in a prehistoric world where what we were dealing with had much more severe consequences, like death or injury. When you're like leaving the cave to hunt mastodons and things like that. So understanding the brain as a biological function and sort of your mind as a philosophical entity that you can manage what thoughts enter your brain or enter your mind really helped me through the layoff.
Awesome, Ed. Thanks for being vulnerable and sharing all the great insights, which is very valuable to many of us in case like we're running through the similar situation, how to cope with the stress and deal with the anxiety. And I know the space is very hard, the market is very hard, and there are many folks who are impacted and going through the stress and anxiety. So these tips will be super valuable to them. So my next question to you, what is the impact you're noticing, especially on getting hired in this generative AI world?
Yeah, so the landscape of the job market completely changed between the time I left LinkedIn and the time I re-entered the job market a few months later. So the first thing, if you look at actual job postings, AI, generative AI, machine learning platforms are basically posted everywhere. Companies that have done layoffs or in hiring freezes, they just have a very small handful of postings, and most of them are in AI, machine learning, and those kinds of platforms. There's a definite pop in that hiring space right now. Now, I don't think all of us need to try to work in that particular field, but applying the things that are happening in generative AI, and being a part of the conversations, trying the tools that are available, I think is important for all product managers and TPMs. Because while you're in the layoff, the conversations that are happening in industry are changing. People at companies have Slack channels where they're exploring generative AI, and subsequently, the interview questions are changing too. So it helps to be able to understand the basics, like what is AGI, artificial general intelligence, what is generative AI, natural language processing, understanding what Turing tests are, and how we evaluate machines versus humans. The whole space kind of reminds me, if you were in around in the mid to late 2000s, of the term big data, where the more you learn, the more you can kind of talk about it in the interview process in whatever space you do work in. There are lots of ways that you can try it out yourself, whether you want to build your resume, use ChatGPT or some of the tools to help you write status reports. Something that I found helpful is I don't write optimal SQL. So if I'm going to run something on a production database, I ask ChatGPT to tighten my queries. And I actually shared the headshot that I have at LinkedIn right now is not me. It's a generated deep fake from tryitonai.com. So I would familiarize myself with the tools so you can speak the language. Now, whether or not you actually use generative AI to do things like build your resume or cover letters is kind of a personal choice. There is a tendency when these things are done using Chat GPT, there's like this joke going around where every time something looks well structured or polished, people are like, oh, did Chat GPT make it? So what that means is it kind of has an identifiable personality right now, which isn't always what makes us as product managers and TPM stand out. One of our special techniques is knowing our audience, knowing which kind of tone to apply to different audiences. And a lot of that is in the context of how you would even ask Chat GPT to write the article to different audience members or stuff. So I personally didn't use it to generate too much other than my profile picture, but I certainly played around with it. But other people definitely are. And I think the key thing is double check it. If you're using AGI to generate something, be aware of the tone, think about your audience, and sometimes overwrite what the AI generates.
This is great. Thanks, Ed, for sharing some of your tips. And I was surprised that your picture is generated by generative AI. That's super fascinating. Yes.
Yeah, I'll share about 60 pictures that were generated, and it only cost $17. And I was telling my parents about photos that we've posted for as families on the wall and paid hundreds of dollars for in the 80s, and I'm like, this is definitely changing that game as well.
Yeah. Are you talking about Lensa.ai?
There's several of them. This
Oh,
was
okay.
tryitonai.com, which had a pop on TikTok actually, so that's how I heard about it.
Nice. Well, I think you brought up some good insights into like how to form your resume and then write your cover letter and all. ChatGPT is able to help. I think it's a good guideline to use. But one thing I always see when you said well structured, but there is a authenticity part that is missing in all those because generative AI can only tell like more of a robo, but it's not bringing in your human angle and aspects. I think throwing out those things are super valuable. Whoever is reading your resume or cover letter, I think that's one thing. And as you rightly said, like PM and TPMs are well positioned to do that with their creativity and knowing their audience better. So I think these are great traits that people can leverage to at least augment themselves using the generative AI in the job market. My next question to you, when we talk so much about generative AI, do you think we'll have an impact on the expectations on PM and TPMs overall?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to up level expectations of TPMs and product managers. A lot of operational things are changing. Some, TPMs or product managers could get by kind of capturing notes or action items, writing status reports. I think a lot of those things are going to be generated. Even like interview questions can be generated, and so we're going to need to be up level to more strategic roles where we're not doing those basic functional operational things and really being more forward looking. It does actually worry me a bit because I can see AGI making moves into strategy too. As a TPM, one of the things that I always did to stand out was I considered myself a fairly technical TPM. So if I was looking at a new system design, I could sketch out 3 or 4 potential solutions, the pros and cons of each. And I've been imagining a artificial intelligence tool that is like architecturally aware of systems and just tells you like where to make optimizations and where to make changes. Similarly, I can see a tool that goes into the code and identifies dependencies and builds base Gantt charts for us based on actual like code rather than having to talk to developers and uncover those dependencies. So I don't think we're too far from that. And I do think the way we leverage these tools is going to become more important. It may even bring TPM and product closer. I've done a bit of both, and I see doing both as like 170% of one person, where the two roles have kind of like a shared 30% function, often complementing each other. But as AI automates some of this stuff, the remaining work may grow smaller, more condensed, and it'll be interesting. So there will definitely be some changes.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think that you're completely right. Things are changing, and even I've seen in product management space also, you can now do like research, competitive analysis, writing your PRDs. Everything can be done using ChatGPT, so that is very surprising. But I guess the amount of time we were spending doing that, like writing one PRD versus 10 PRDs, I think that is going to change with generative AI. However, what is core to us in terms of creativity or asking the right questions, understanding the depth, I think those will be still continue to be valuable. And I guess as we are in the space, do you think that is some one area that everyone would try to focus more on building than the more of the tactical part?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even with these generative AI tools, they depend on the prompts that you pose to them. So what we were talking about human emotion, you could say like write a document that does this, or you could say write a document that conveys these sort of human emotions or appeals to these sort of audiences. And I think we will have to spend a lot of time in that strategic place where even if we're going to use the tools for tactical reasons, we'll still have to put a lot of strategy and thought into how we leverage them, when we leverage them, those sorts of things.
Awesome. Actually, that leads to my next question to you. How should PMs and TPMs prepare for jobs to beat this competition and this competitive landscape, given the roles are changing, and how one can prepare for that?
Yeah, so I learned a lot about this in the layoff, and I'm excited to help people with this. So one thing is deliberate learning. Right now, you can certainly apply to like 10, 20 jobs a day on LinkedIn. You're probably not going to get a lot of hits. What you can do though is do a lot of deliberate learning in these spaces. There are a lot of YouTube videos you can watch. There are cheap courses on Coursera from credible sources. You can even get certifications. I recently got one in machine learning basics from deeplearning.ai in Stanford. And you should really put in the work and take advantage of what's out there because you should know that other people are. The other thing with deliberate learning that I've become aware of is I'm 36. And when I entered the job market in 2009, I had a lot of fresh skills that I learned out of school. Right now, there are definitely people entering the market who are younger, who these skills are super fresh for. They're just coming out of school. So a lot of what happens in this sort of economy is, they lay off staff and senior people, and they rely on internship and co-op programs to backfill us with some of our skill sets. So you do actually have to think about those emerging skill sets and be deliberate about learning them. As I mentioned earlier, you can play around with tools. One thing that helped me was just brainstorming startups. I had an interest in psychology, as I shared, and there's this thing called art therapy, which it's basically when people are struggling, having them create art to express their emotions. And I always thought there was something a little bit off with that industry. If you're like having an emotional breakdown, you're not going to spend like 10 hours making a painting. But if you can just talk to a robot and it visualizes something for you, that shows your emotions, that's pretty cool. So like I started thinking about ways to apply the technology if I did do a startup, even though I was still in the market. The last thing I would say is build this into your storytelling. One of the mistakes I made early on when I was applying for jobs with AI and ML focuses is I had mentored a lot of TPMs building ML systems, but I hadn't built them myself. So I did need to dive a little bit deeper into the technical areas. So I wasn't just talking about the meta aspects of it, but actually understood it. I do want to caution people that you don't have to necessarily go into a job for AI. There will still continue to be jobs in areas like data compliance, marketing, experimentation, consumer products, everything that we've all done. But it's really thinking about how you can bring generative AI and ML to those things. And understanding that there are a lot of talented people in the market right now who are learning those things, and just really being deliberate about those learnings.
Yeah, well said. I think this is very, very important. Um, and I think, two more questions. I'll pause for a second and see if there is any pressing question from the audience. Feel free to raise a hand, or else I'll go with my two other questions, and then we'll open up the floor for Q&A. Okay, I don't see anyone raising hands, so I'll move forward with my question. My next question to you, Ed, and thanks for sharing all the tips. I think this will be super valuable who are now looking for jobs in this competitive landscape, and some of these could be something that they can leverage and then try for landing in a job. So, what are some of the strategies PMs and TPMs can apply to survive the layoff? I think that is more important. So, if you could share some of your experience and tips, that will be valuable to all the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. And given the economic conditions, this is going to be a reality for many people. While I'm blessed to have recently got a job, I still see the news every day, and people in different markets. I worry about friends, so I do have some good tips. First one actually starts with budgeting. A good rule of thumb is to save now and plan to spoil yourself later once the situation is more stable. It might be a longer haul than you anticipate. As I mentioned, I was naive and I thought I could get a job with my connections within a month or two. But people had been through this before. They told me some specific numbers that stood out. They told me that, like, a recession is 2 quarters, and they said what you're going to see in the news is for at least 9 months to a year, you're going to see these layoff cycles. They told me that most of their friends who had been laid off in the past were in the job market for at least 4 to 6 months. So in terms of budgeting at the holidays, we bought ourselves sort of like gift cards. The grocery stores closed for interviews, but we didn't plan to go on trips. We didn't, buy new products. I think there's an interesting philosophical dilemma for folks who have children, because you may not want your children to, feel the impact of the economy. We have 3 dogs. We spoiled the heck out of our dogs. They didn't notice any difference. They got all their treats and toys that they usually get. But ourselves, we held off, and then we took a nice trip to New Orleans when we both landed work this past February. So budgeting is super important, just thinking about it. For a lot of people who are new to the job market, you should also watch YouTube videos to learn about like your state benefits. A lot of us have put a lot of money into the system, and it's okay to get some money out. Um, there's different laws in different states. Like in California, you're allowed to collect unemployment while you're collecting severance. In a lot of states, you can't do that. There's different health insurance options. Cobra is expensive, but I had to take it because I had some ongoing medical conditions. Um, a big part of it for me is learning about how to soothe and process rejection. So we're all going to experience depression, anxiety, and those sorts of things. Um, so I won't go into all the details, but some of the things that have really helped me, as I mentioned, understanding some of the biological triggers. There's a lot of literature right now out there about attachment styles. I have an anxious attachment style. So when I feel rejected, I tend to want to know why and kind of like hold on to it. Other people have avoidant attachment styles where they kind of move on very quickly. But figure out how to soothe yourselves, whether like how to make yourself feel better and calmer, kind of like parenting yourselves. Another big thing is relying on the community. Um, Actually, if I could sum this up in a metaphor that has worked for me, if you think about a chair that has kind of like four legs, um, you need to have at least like four or five, 3 to 5 different things in your life that are important to you, and work can be one of them. But during this time, some of us are going to have less than stellar experiences in the work world. So it's important to have other legs of the stool to kind of lean on. A big part of that is how to stay involved with your professional groups. I know I reached out to Madhu and some of the other folks that I had worked with when they were doing these events in the past, and I told them I feel like an imposter. I don't feel comfortable showing up to functions. I don't even know how to introduce myself to people anymore. Do I say I work in the tech industry? Do I say I was laid off from the tech industry? So it's easy to start to slip away. And what helped me was finding the things that felt good. So like learning and getting like 90% on AWS or ML exams made me feel good. Connecting with colleagues made me feel good. And I'd actually challenge those of you who are employed to really check in with your unemployed friends and encourage them to stay involved. They're processing things like, you see help wanted signs at the grocery store, or like as a project manager, there's all kinds of construction going on around me. And so that, you do consider like down leveling and getting out of tech because you feel like an imposter. What I would say is I encourage most of you to not feel that way, but to rely on to find the techniques that work for you to make yourself feel good, to feel accepted, and to feel warm. And without being too emotional, like those of you who reached out and checked in on me, it really meant a lot. That's what kept me kind of going and feeling accepted and feeling like I belonged. Um, so most of you know who you are. So thank you to everyone who helped me on that journey. I also want to say, like, in this economy, there's going to be some bad experiences. And you have to recognize the patterns and when to move on. So examples are, you interview for a position and the culture isn't a fit. You don't have a good vibe with the hiring manager. The role isn't necessarily right for you. Like, a lot of the semantics, but you're not perfect. I had a few experiences where I was clearly like the second or third choice and kind of being kept warm. And I had to know when to kind of like move on from that. There's going to be situations where you're ghosted. There's going to be situations in which people you were interviewing with or recruiters themselves are laid off. There's going to be situations in which jobs are pulled. So I did have to learn not to get attached to any one position that I really, really wanted. Early on, I did that, and it took an emotional toll. So developing kind of a workflow or framework where you can move on quickly. For me, unfortunately, I don't know that everybody should do this, but part of my workflow is like assuming that I've lost. So after an interview, I assume that I'm rejected, and I just move on to the next thing until I get good news. Not everybody should do that, and the last thing I mentioned is really understand the macro economy. I spoke a little bit earlier that younger kids are getting some of our jobs. As we get laid off, you don't see internship and co-op programs fading. And what that means is they're going to backfill a lot of our responsibilities into entry-level positions. Understand that companies are trying to make quarterly earnings look good. Um, the way that companies maybe felt about you and your ROI in a strong economy will be very different. Everybody's kind of looking after themselves and worried about their own careers, rightfully. But there is some good news in this. When you look at the job markets, a lot of industries outside of tech are trying to pull tech talent. So there are jobs in government, finance, retail stores where they're actually up leveling and hiring a lot of like senior staff, principal level product managers and TPMs. Um, and so I think that there is going to be a transition where some of us have to move into those industries. Um, and build that into your decision making, the opportunity that you could have and the impact that you could have on industries outside of Silicon Valley, because there are emerging opportunities there, and you have an opportunity to be kind of on the revolutionary side of that. Yeah, those are some of the things that really helped me. But of course, I could go into more detail on any of them if anyone wants to reach out.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. Those are very insightful and being vulnerable. I guess this really helps. Like you're so true to yourself, and what you're sharing is very valuable. And thanks for sharing the tips. Like especially think outside the box in this difficult situation. Brain stop working, and how you can soothe yourself, and then work towards looking for new bright light and opportunities. And there are always opportunities out there. You just have to rebuild your decision making and then work consistently towards the goal, and it will happen eventually. So I know we're almost close to the time, but we can like probably spend a couple of more minutes if you have time, if audience have question. Does anyone have question? You can raise your hand, and I can unmute. I can invite you to the stage, and you can unmute yourself and ask question, or even share your perspective if you want to share with the rest of the audience. Looks like nobody is raising hand. Lena, I saw a thumbs up. Not sure you're trying to speak. If you want to speak, raise your hand. Otherwise, I assume just give a nod. So I'll just wait for a second to see if anyone has question. Okay, looks like not. So we will then wrap up, and I have my final question for Ed. And before we wrap up, I just wanted to share that I'm recording the session, and I will be sharing the recording as part of my monthly newsletter and on the Spotify channel. And if you're interested, you can go back and always listen to it later. So, my final question to you, Ed, any final thoughts before we wrap up, and how anyone will contact you if they have follow up questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I'm happy to help anyone who reaches out to me. I may be a little bit slow in responses. Give me like, a 72-hour SLA or so. One of the things that really was a benefit to me during this layoff is I built a big network. I met a lot of recruiters. I met a lot of hiring managers. Some of those hiring managers really helped me land a job by referring me to other friends. Um, so you can actually use this as an opportunity to expand your network. And if folks want, if they see specific positions posted and they'd like to see if I know someone, you can feel free to reach out. LinkedIn is the best way to contact me. I've become a daily active user. Just be cautious of that. I've noticed some people on LinkedIn who constantly like kind of negative posts. Don't do that too much, because it will create a viral loop and your potential employers will see it. But otherwise, yeah, happy to help anyone. Contact me on LinkedIn. I also want to thank Madhu for giving me the opportunity to speak about these subjects and join this talk. Having a more public brand is something that I want to do in the future, and I really appreciate the platform for Madhu and all the attendees.
Yeah. Thank you, Ed. I think we are at time. Thanks for your time and sharing all the valuable tips and insights. I'm sure this is going to be valuable to all our listeners, and hope more people can also get to listen to it offline. And yeah, thanks for sharing how to reach out to you. So that's also everyone can do. If don't hesitate to reach out to Ed if you have questions. Certainly, you can reach out to me as well. We are here to help you all and help going through this difficult phase. And something that really worked for Ed, I thought it would be good to spread the vibes to everyone and then share the experience so everyone could benefit out of it. And myself, I also got benefited listening to it. So thanks a lot, Ed. And with that, I'll also thank the audience who were engaged and listening all throughout. So